to order our meeting, starting with the work session. And Dr. Staven, do you want to speak before Todd kicks it up?
Sure. We've got our proposed budget to review tonight, and as a reminder, this is a draft. Any questions that you have, we can capture and bring them back. Otherwise, you're certainly free to ask questions. Tonight we have an overview, and then Dr. Zeke will also be providing an overview from some of our federal dollars lens. And so our overall objective is to get a budget that we feel like is centered on the needs of the district and have that finalized sometime later this summer. So we're not going to vote on the budget tonight or vote on anything, just as a reminder for the process. And Todd, remind me what our target date typically is, July, August, for the final budget to be voted on by the board?
Yeah, the final one is the annual meeting, which is the second Monday in July.
And so I believe our April 7th work session will be to briefly revisit this. We can answer questions at that point, but the majority of that work session is scheduled to go over some of the feedback that we've been getting on our district priorities. So if we need to adjust those schedules, we certainly can, but that's what's slated right now for our next work session. So with that, I will turn it back to Mr. V.
Thank you. So I think we kind of had an overview, so we can go down to the second bullet. So what we're going to do next is, a big part of our budget over the next 3 or so years is going to be coronavirus funds that we've received, and Kirk's going to give you an overview of that. Then we're going to go through our 5-year financial plan on the general fund. It kind of drives our general fund budget from year to year. Then go through the general fund, just the major changes in the general fund and the special ed fund, and then the capital outlay fund, mostly concentrate on the 5-year plan there. And then it's a public meeting, and so we will have, if anybody from the public wants to comment on the budget, they sure can. And then item 6, we have school board committee reports. and then remember, we will have a follow-up next Wednesday to follow up with questions you have about the budget, and we get into more detail on the certain items that you're most interested in. So with that, I will turn it over to Kirk, and I'm going to go over there. And for the public, I'm going to just let them see what page we're talking off of. I think everybody has a book. You get one if they don't. So I'll turn it over to
All right. This is a summary, budget summary of the federal coronavirus acts, and that will do 4 things. It will provide an overview of the recent acts passed by Congress. We'll cover the ESSER allocations and preliminary requested activity budgets. We'll provide categorical examples of budget expenses and then highlight the allowable expenses. So in a land far, far away, not too very long ago, the Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, March 27th, 2020, and that's called the CARES Act, and that was in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sioux Falls School District was awarded $4.58 million of the $13.2 billion allocated to schools across the country. This allocation was referred to as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as ESSER. The first one was ESSER 1. And those awards were calculated on the same proportion as Title I Part A. And these are available through September 30, 2022. On September 23rd, a few months later, 2020, Governor Noem announced that public and private schools in South Dakota would receive an additional $75 million or $500 per student in additional funding from the Coronavirus Relief Fund for expenses incurred between March 1st and December 1st of 2020. The CRF was created as part of the CARES Act, and the Sioux Falls School District was awarded $12.1 million from the CRF based on the 2019 fall census enrollment data. A few months later, Congress passed the Coronavirus Relief and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as CRRSA, on December 27th to help school districts prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. The Sioux Falls School District was awarded $16.6 million of the $54.3 billion allocated to public schools across the country. This allocation is referred to ESSER 2 and was calculated on the same proportion again, Title I, Part A. And these funds are available for an additional year until September 30, 2023. Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, otherwise known as ARP, into law on March 11th. And again, Sioux Falls School District will receive an allocation, but as of yet have not, of the $123 billion allocated to schools across the country. This allocation will be referred to as ESSER 3, and again, Title I, Part A will be calculated. And these funds will be available through September 30, 2024. On the next page is the table of expenses, and these are for the ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 allocations. To begin on the left-hand side, you'll see in yellow ESSER 1, 2, and 3 going down the left, and across the top, these are our fiscal years. First year, which is our current year, second year, third year, ending up at fiscal year 24, which we would term as annual ongoing expenses. So if you look in match-up ESSER 1 and first-year expenses, we have an initial allocation of $4.6 million, and we have requested activities currently at $4.1 million, and then we incurred some indirect costs, and then we have our fiscal year total of $4.5 million, which then carries over remaining balance into the second year of $86,000, and we have some requested activities in the second year. And that will do it for ESSER 1. And the total is on the right-hand column for $4.6 million thus far. Of the $4,607,000 of the $4,630,000. So we're almost there with ESSER 1. In ESSER 2, that initial allocation, $16.6 million. And just like ESSER 1, our initial requested activities are $8.2 million. With some indirect costs, with fiscal year total of $8.2 million in this current year, moving over to the second year with a total of $4.9 million, and third year, $3.2, and so forth, for a total currently of $17 million. And in ESSER 3, since we don't have really a budget, we have an idea, we're gonna conservatively talk $30 million. And requested activities thus far for this year, $10.9 million with our indirect costs, and then totaling up $12.2 million. And you can see as we go along all the way across the right to $33 million. Then we go to the bottom right, totaling everything up, our total indirect costs, about $4.3 million. Total direct costs, $50.7 million. And you'll notice that there's an over budget of $560,000. That negative budget balance can be covered by some of the indirect costs and then possibly an increase in the ESSER 3 allocation, because we just guessed it, $30 million. On the next page, we have some of our examples that are categorized. Some of these are single cost items, and some of these are a total over multiple years. So for instance, in facilities, we have extended HVAC run times to help refresh the air. That we estimate about $530,000. Bottle-filled drinking stations, we've added $201,000, and $2.07 million for our electronic air cleaning system to kill those viruses all throughout the district. In instruction, $2.9 million. In SIPS intervention for elementary students. And just a note that Promising Futures Fund will have a $600,000 donation to help out with those expenses. $645,000 in elementary summer academies, and that's multiple years. $360,000 in professional learning with an EL coordinator, English language learner coordinator. That again is multi-year. $6 million in student and teacher technology with interactive display boards, and $3.5 million in a fixed amplification system that's headsets and microphones for teachers to wear. So if they're wearing a mask like me, I'm using a microphone, except to be attached to my head, and then I could walk around, and then it would be coming directly through the speakers in the classroom. Really saves on the voice, especially if you're talking through a mask.
And the great thing about that expense, I've actually been hoping for that expense for a long time for students who are of harder hearing, for example, but it really helps with that in the classroom as well, regardless of mask use or not, is that it's a great usage that other school districts had in place, and it would be nice for us to finally be able to offer that for our children.
I would characterize that as a classroom enhancement across the district. And it is very advantageous for hearing impaired, but it also is an equity access enhancement for all kids. So no matter where you're at in the classroom, you can hear the instruction. And if you're right in front, you're not getting extreme loud, you're getting normal teaching voice, and it's part of many, many schools now. And with adding the interactive display boards, it makes sense to do both at the same time when we're messing with wires and paying people to do installations. So that's why those two are coupled at the same time.
We saw that at NSBA. They have an example of that.
Much less strain on the voice, you don't have to. And if you're hard of hearing, much easier to hear. In extended learning, the first bulleted item is $645,000 for elementary summer academies. That's a double up. I must be very excited about summer learning. So that's just a duplicate. And we have several items in extended learning that are to be determined. These are recent ideas, and as we're still waiting on ESSER 3, that is to be determined as we figure out what the cost might be for there. In health, $1.1 million on additional counseling staff to support students with their social emotional, and $374,000 on additional nursing staff. To continue on, we have remote learning, sanitize and social distancing mitigations. Special education has funding out of there. Virtual learning has budgeted allocated items there, and then some additional items like $900,000 to recruit and incentivize substitute teachers, and $90,000 to create the district's website to help revise that.
Excuse me, can you go back to the virtual learning and just dive into that a little more on the $2.2 million on
Yep.
the elementary virtual academy?
Those are the salaries and benefits for our virtual academy teachers.
This year.
This year, currently, yes.
Oh, currently right
Yep.
now. And at what point is that projected to end then? If it's just this, it'll run until
Currently, those are just
the 1st of this
Yep.
year.
currently those are just budgeted through this contract school year.
Okay,
June
so that will end.
30th.
Okay, right, because our fiscal calendar is different. Thanks, Cynthia. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And you can see the categorical examples. The allowable expenses, there are many, several pages, because it goes from ESSER 1 to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Many of them overlap each other. They're not all brand new. I'll just highlight some of them in ESSER 1 and just note that they stream their way through to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. The coordination, preparedness, and response to coronavirus. We were allowed to have resources necessary for the needs of individual schools. In ESSER 1, we could target the activities to address unique needs of low-income students, students with disabilities, English learners, homeless, etc. We were allowed to purchase supplies to sanitize and clean facilities, purchase educational technology, things on mental health, strategies on mental health, and other activities. Number 12 is the catch-all, other activities that we may have deemed necessary to maintain operation and continuity of services, and that one streams through ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 as well. ESSER 2, again, is mainly the same. Continues to talk about maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrade projects to improve the indoor air quality in school facilities. This would be 14B, and including heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems, filtering. And then again, 15B is that catch-all or whatever we need to maintain operations. ESSER 3 is much the same, except ESSER 3 has an emphasis on opening schools safely for next year, which we've already done. But if you think about this being broadly swept across the entire country, many school districts weren't even in school. So there's a big emphasis on getting back to school, which we already are. And then in ESSER 3, 20% must be allocated to mitigate learning loss. So it's now getting the effects and the ripple of the coronavirus. And that comes in a few different areas of extended school day or extended school year, summer school, or after school. It's like additional learning. So in summary, the budget includes expenses deemed allowable per the guidelines passed by Congress. ESSER funds do not include a supplement, not supplant requirement, meaning that we can use these federal funds to replace general funds without penalty. We're still waiting on the ESSER 3 allocation. As of today, we do not have it. We have an estimated $54 million of expenses over 4 years and ongoing annual expenses of $4 million once we reach that 4th year. And that is the conclusion of the summary of the CARES Act. I stand by for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much. You know, we gave a very brief synopsis to the legislators when they were here for our legislative breakfast before they went to session in January. And then since Nan and I were able to listen to this during the budget committee hearings, it's kind of repeat, but I just want to say that this to the public is, this is our way to show you what we have. You know, you've been seeing a lot of money coming to schools, and this is where we are effectively and trying to use this money in a safe manner so that when we go forward, we're not tying ourselves to expenses we can't continue to operate or staff or whatever after these funds disappear. And that's the tightrope, I think is the term I've heard used by Dr. Stavum. We must walk to make sure when we are taking on these additional expenses that we are doing it so that we can safely do it 5-10 years in the future, so that we're not having to fire staff, we're not able to keep up with our contract negotiations, et cetera, on that. So I appreciate all this information, because even though we've seen some of this before, it's good to have this recap for the public, the taxpayers, and everyone who is providing this income to allow us to be in school. The other great thing I think seeing with this ESSER funding is that since we have been open, is that we can really do intense work on our summer programming and extended programming for our students who did have a loss of mitigation from the March, or just have been struggling in school, or maybe have been struggling with the virtual academy as well, so that we can hopefully get them to where they need to be going forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I would disagree that the hurdles that we have to overcome are probably unique compared to, like you mentioned, other states who are really just trying to get their kids back into school. And so as a parent, I'm so thankful that we've been in school and been safe and been doing a great job all of this school year with, 38 days left or something that we have to make it through. But I think about how we were able to really minimize that loss by getting our kids back into school right away in August, September, and keeping them there. And so that gives us some flexibility to use these funds, not on the big chore of reopening, but of doing what's best for our kids through programming to help them be successful long term. So kudos to all of us and the team and everybody in our community for being supportive of us getting back in and digging in and then really having the resources to use maybe in different ways than others are able to.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. It's really complex keeping track of the requirements and the timelines that go along with these funds, but we're trying to be really good stewards. I think it's just very interesting to think about the picture of using the funds as they're intended with a district like ours that spent the initial funding on things that they were supposed to be spent on, like all of the PPE and all of the cleaning supplies and all of those things. And yet if you were a district that wasn't operational at that point in time, what does that look like? You know, I don't think many people would appreciate it at federal level, my argument that maybe those funds should be redistributed for districts that have been open all year, but we're gonna keep doing the best we can to do what the dollars are intended to do and keep moving things forward here as well as we can. Mr. Beek?
Thank you. So, you know, we always, we don't really budget. Well, we do. We budget for next year, but we want to make sure that our long-term outlook, our budget, our fund balance isn't dropping like a rock when we hit 5 years out. So we always budget to our 5-year plan. And this is kind of the detail of it. The two things I want to point out on this page, and then I'll get into the variables, the ones we really control on the next sheet. But the one item is on that line 21, that box around that FY26 figure is 7.8%. You know, the Finance Action Network has met several times looking over our budget. It's business individuals recommended by the chamber, the local chamber, to come in and look through our budget and see what we're doing right and see if we're doing anything wrong and make recommendations. And one thing they did say was that our fund balance should target around 8.5% to a spot out in the future, and that 8.5% can be plus or minus 5%. So you see here, and it shouldn't be dropping when we get to that spot. It should be leveling off. So you can see here, this one shows 7.8%. It was 8% the year before. The dollar amount is minuscule that we would be declining out in 26 if we actually hit this number of $203,000 on a $200 million budget. So it is flattening out as we get there. So I think this meets the intent of kind of their advice. So that's that figure we were shooting for. Kirk, you want to go to the next one? The next one, when we get down to those yellow items, that's when we were working with that group and now we use it ourselves, where we say these are kind of the variables that really affect our budget, where we can make changes, you know, as part of the budget committee and part of the school board on the budget, to these items of what you think assumptions are going to be and what you actually want to do. And so these are some of those assumptions we're doing. And I should point out on line 25 down there on that opt-out, we last met with the Finance Action Network, it was a couple of years ago, and they recommended that we had a $7.5 million opt-out going off the books next in calendar year 2022. And they recommended, instead of opting out for a big, large amount, to, you know, that's going to last 5 or 10 years, and then when you start getting within that on the horizon, you don't know if you're going to have that large amount, to opt out for small amounts like your laddering CDs. So we opted out for $1.5 million in a advanced plan to eventually replace this $7.5 million a couple years ago, and we opted out for $1.6 million the year we're in right now, the calendar year. And this plan has a $1.7 million opt-out. And then that $7.5 million opt-out will go off, but we'll still have the funds to opt out for 9.1. We actually take the $9.1 million opt-out, which is what we've been taking for the last 3 or 4 years. So that, just know that this plan does involve an additional $1.7 million opt-out, but it won't increase the amount we're actually levying for. It was still planned to opt out for 9.135, I think it is, $million. So that's on line 25. And the reason that's all in a box is because those numbers still have to be opted out for. They're still, you know, it still has to be done. We've got that other item on there, line 22, is showing the last year of, you know, when they did the big change to the state aid formula in the 2016 legislature, they equalized other funds outside the revenue. Our per pupil amount was less than the average, so it's been slowly but surely being phased into the formula. That'll be the last year of it. So we're projecting that would be a $932,000 gain above the regular state aid increase. So that's what that figure is. We've got COVID funding built in here. It was built into the stuff that was in the budget, not some of the other items that Kirk was showing that hasn't been budgeted yet in the federal programs. It was items that, because of that supplant provision not being in there, that we could use that money to fund things that we would budget in through our regular budget. So that's what that is representing there. And that number will change in the next 2 weeks as they build this out. There's other items as well. So that one's highly fluid. And as we find out how much is available, we update this plan to meet that. So there's our opt-out. I already talked about that. Transfer from the capital outlay fund. We have been helping to balance our general fund budget by transferring in money from our capital outlay fund. It's easier to do right now anyway, because we've got several projects on the books that are being funded by the bond. So there isn't as high a need to build buildings with that capital outlay fund dollars right now. And then we have the state aid increase. We obviously don't set that, we predict it. We know this year it's 2.4%. It was, if strictly followed the formula, it would have been less than that. So we were grateful to get a manageable number of 2.4. That was nice. We project 2 going forward. We used to do 3, but that's kind of the high end of a normal thing. So 2 is more like your average figure. So we've projected that for the last few years. I think it was the finance action that recommended that. Efficiency factor, we've got, every year we expect to save some money by looking into our budget and looking for items we can cull out of there. And so we've got, this particular budget has a 0.5% efficiency factor going forward each year. And that's a fairly significant number because the difference between the 7.8 with the efficiency factor and the 7.8 without it, it would be 3.4 out there in that last year. So we do have to, every year we're expected to find some efficiencies within our budget. Teacher delta, we call it that because teacher salaries are the biggest part of the salaries, but it applies to all groups. It's just when somebody retires or leaves the district, usually they're replaced by somebody that makes less. So we figure in our salary increases, so we deduct that off, but that's what that number is. And our health insurance increase, this year was 0, so that was nice. And we usually put in 5 going out here, but we don't often have a 5% increase. So that's something, as we look to make adjustments in the budget, sometimes you can look at a more realistic figure. I think we've averaged about 3.5 since we started working with the Hayes companies. So those are where those are those key areas that we make these projections, and those can be tweaked as we go forward in finalizing the budget. Anything on, there's a lot of info on these pages, but is there anything you'd like me to talk further about before we move on? Well, the higher we make that, the less comfortable I am. So I think 2 is pretty good. This governor has actually been pretty good about not sticking us with like a 1.4 or a 1.0 when the rest of the state government is growing at 3 or 4%. He hasn't necessarily stuck to that, recommending that, well, that's what the state aid says, 3% inflation, whichever's less. And inflation is creeping up. So I do think 2% is probably a good safe number. And it's probably a better number than using 3 every time like we used to do, because every time that number ticks down, we slide back a little bit, even though our salaries are tied to that figure.
It's more conservative.
Yeah, yep, it's much more conservative than 3. I mean, if we hit a bunch of 1s, that's bad, but I think 2 is a pretty fair figure there. And I should say, line 32, it's not in yellow because it's linked to the state aid increase, but that's where our, almost 90% of our non-federal revenues come from the state aid formula, and about 85% of our salaries and benefits, of our general fund budget is salaries and benefits. So when the salary increase is higher than the state aid increase, then you start to have to dip into your fund balance, and if it's less than our state, if it's lower than our state aid increase, then you start having your fund balance grow. So we usually tie that to that figure, and that's what you see there. We do have the option every year of going an additional 0.75 if we can afford it, because a 2% basically just funds the steps on the schedule for the teachers. It doesn't keep the salary schedule moving. So this year, you see in 22, we've determined through the budget process, of course, that has to be approved by the board, that we would do the additional 0.75 to keep the salary schedule moving forward instead of stagnating. So that is another key item on here as well. All right, without, unless there's any other questions, just I always like to show what our property taxes are doing here. I mean, you guys are, the school board's always been very good about trying to weigh what you want to do for kids and what you want to do for salaries versus what the obligation to the property taxpayer. So this is a long history of what our property taxes have done over the years. It is a house, a given house in a typical house in Sioux Falls. You can see in 2000, if you go down to kind of that 4th area there, in 2000, that house was assessed at $98,000 and the taxable value was $93,000. In 2022, it's projected. The house will be assessed at $200,000, so it's doubled in value, and it'll be taxed at $188,000. Over that period of time, the levy on that house has dropped from $11.74 per thousand to $8.27. And of course, with the increasing value, though, it doesn't mean the taxes went down. But the average increase, or the total increase in school property taxes on that house has been 44.7% over 22 years. The average annual increase has been 1.8%. Certainly not a huge figure. Just for comparison, it's another tax everybody pays in the state is the sales tax. And if you do a per capita sales tax amount, and I have to back up 2 years because I don't know how to project what their taxes are going to be 2 years from now, but I can see what they were in 2020. So I went back to 98 for this. The average person pays 132% more sales tax in 2020 than they did in 1998. And the average annual increase in the per capita sales tax has been 3.9%. Just a comparison, just to make you know what, I mean, just so you can have a perspective of what that 1.8% annual increase figure looks like. Any questions on that? Hearing none, quickly through the general fund revenues, there isn't a ton to talk about there. Obviously, the two by far biggest sources of our revenue are the district property tax levy, and that includes the $9 million opt-out, $9.1 million opt-out, and general state aid are the two biggest things. I'll just point out the other revenues that are getting folded in. So even if they go up, even if we have in these other revenues, even if they double, it's just going to be less state aid we'll receive 2 years later. So we just kind of budget them exactly what we do with the state aid. That's the gross receipts tax, that's the bank franchise tax, and for us, the other one that's key is the county apportionment, and that's fine money. So we used to tell people, on your way home from this meeting, speed is more money for your local school, but we don't do that anymore because it's just shared throughout the state aid formula. So any questions on you can see our revenues are projected to increase by 7.2 million, and we haven't budgeted a lot of those ESSER funds yet. That will be in the July budget once we get that all ironed out. We don't want to rush into that. Kirk gave you the big 30,000 foot overview of what that looks like, but we haven't put that into most of that is not in the budget yet. The expenditures by program will go through, this is how we sum them up by program level. You can see the school-based programs, which are basically high schools, middle schools, and elementaries, is a $2.6 million increase. The district coordinated services on the next page, which are things like curriculum services, staff development, finance office, probably the most important one there. And you're thinking, $8.6 million, oh my gosh, you guys, why isn't the increase is going out to the school? The big one there is the committed funds. And the committed funds, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second, but that's got the salary increases built into that. We don't have every one of these programs put the salaries and benefit increases. We do that in one spot and then we spread it out over those budgets. So that's why that one looks so big, is because it contains that committed funds. And then below that is what we call the restricted programs, which those are programs which are nice to have. They're mostly federal. But you can't take Title I dollars and say, oh, I want to increase the board salaries with that. You know, if you don't spend it on or the business manager's salary for that matter. So if you don't spend it on what they, you say, we're going to cut the Title I program, then you're just going to cut the revenues. So you've got to spend it on what they tell you, and so you can't use it to do other things with. So that's why. So after that is a little bit more detail. Oh, I should say before I plow through all this so fast, you guys have, each one of you, a flash drive with all this information on it, plus the details of it, the painstaking details of where the 18 or 19 budget committees went through and prepared all those budgets. And those, a lot of you have been on the budget committee. It's been presented to the budget committee, and you go to some degree or another, you go through those, and and see what it would look like with a 10% cut and with a 5% cut or whatnot. So you've got all that in front of you, and you know, we're meeting a week from now, so you can go through it. And if you have questions about any of that, just let us know, and we'll get the right person to answer those questions at the next meeting. So what I'm gonna, so this next document's a pretty nice one. It was actually invented by Rich Clune out at STC. Don't tell him I said that. It gives you kind of an easy look at the main changes to each one of the budgets that are recommended. And I'm not going to go through all the level 4s because I would just end up repeating myself saying status quo, status quo. So if you go down to tab 12, it's on that first page. That was a proposed expansion of adding a 1.74 FTE teacher to their, because of the cut they made last year in the EAs. We're not recommending funding that, but because of the lack of growth in middle school compared to budgeted last year, we did put it in the committed funds packet so that they can have that FTE for 1 year. Well, hopefully we get back onto a normal growth pattern. So it is funded for next year, but it's just not funded in the base. We just did it through the committed fund packet. The next one I'd point out that had beyond a level 4, different than a level 4, is tab 24. I think it's on the next, it's on page 21 or page 3 in this document, whichever you prefer to look at. Fine and Performing Arts asks for 2 expansions. One involves band and what we call volunteers, but they're paid volunteers, but they're funded by, fundraised by the boosters. And we're not recommending doing that. We're not recommending, we've got fundraised football coaches, fundraised basketball coaches. We have a lot of additional coaching positions that are fundraised. So we don't want to start to get in the habit of now funding to what has been in the past fundraised to get extra. So we do not recommend funding that. The other one is a couple of instructional coaches to help with the fine arts curriculum. That is actually going to be coming up next year. So we're not doing it this year, but we plan to bring it to the budget committee next year and recommend it.
Because the curriculum.
Yeah, because of the curriculum cycle, right. So it would make more sense next year. So it isn't that the group recommended a no, it's that not this year, but next year is how that went. Auxiliary programs on tab 30. That was auxiliary programs cover a lot of things, JDC, whatnot, but the biggest part of that is Joe Foss. And in Joe Foss a year ago, we took that over on our own, or I think it was 2 years ago, but a year ago we really planned for it. And they developed their own curriculum, and it was one-time expense that was built into that program, and they're just taking that out. That's what that level 3 recommendation is there. Athletics on line 35, there was 2 proposed expansions there. One is for, and you especially see it this year, all those games that are live streamed, they have a teacher or some type of an instructor, a coach if you want, that oversees that. The kids do it, but that oversees that. This is actually funding that position rather than expecting community relations or some other, they're actually getting it into the district budget. So that is recommended. Then there was girls softball, but that's part of Casey's study. So that is just going to be held until the end of his study. So I expect that will probably be back next year, but that will depend on that study Casey brought to you guys a couple of 2 or 3 meetings ago. So that's what's going on there.
Can I ask a question about the athletics?
Yeah.
Just that live stream production coordinator. I mean, I know we've got issues with licensing of music and band concerts, orchestra concerts, but would we ever be able to use that position for something other than athletics?
Yeah, I think so. Teresa, do you want to chime in?
So that live streaming, the live streaming event like that.
Okay, so not just athletics. Okay. Right.
Yeah, sure. So the next item that isn't a level 4 is tab 37. it's staff development. There are a couple there as well. One of those is a full FTE world language coach that's being funded in this. And then 2 additional days of page training at the end of the year for first year staff. Said that right, Teresa? Yeah, so that will, you can go ahead if you want.
So that page training really working on connections, biases, that systemic district, and by putting those extra days in their first year, that lots of year that that will start.
The next one is tab 45. It's operational services. This is one of those where you don't add every time you add some square footage or whatever, but once in a while it adds up and you need some positions. So they're adding 2 maintenance positions, a mechanical and can't read my writing. A mechanical and what's the other one?
Carpentry.
Carpenter, yeah, thanks. So they're adding 2 of those, and it's because of the two new buildings is where they finally decided to add 2 on that. They actually had a level 3 slight cut that they did, so they built the level 5 on top of the level 3 instead of the level 4. So they did make a little bit of a reduction, but then added in these 2 positions is what they did there. And then the committed funds, which I talked about a second ago, just that's where we budget all the items that, a lot of the items anyway, that don't fit in other budgets. And some of those items are the 3.15% salary increase for the district. And that's roughly, and 1% is roughly $1 million in the general fund. We usually budget 2 contingency teachers in case we're off on our FTE counts for students. This year we budgeted 10 because we don't have a great idea of we didn't have nearly the growth we thought we'd this year, and we don't know what's going to happen next year. But we just didn't want to put them out there, and so we've got those in that budget in case we need them if we see we're off in one area or another. So we budgeted 10 contingency teachers for next year.
And you'll see a similar budget of that also in sped when we get to that.
Yes, that's correct. And then our insurance is in there, but that's flat. So it's a sizable chunk of our salary and benefit budget, but it is flat next year. So that's nice. And the same with health insurance and dental are both flat next year. That is kind of about it. Any questions on any of that? Kind of went through that fast, but you'll have time to look it over and read up all on it over the next week.
I think I said this at our other budget meeting too, but having those 10 slots is such good planning for the district, I think, because as we saw last year with people going in and out of school and virtual academy and so forth, and we had teachers having to change, that it allows us to have the staff ready, hired, and be placed at the right spot at the right time so we can service our families.
Yep, and then so next we have the federal programs. There isn't a lot of action going on here yet because they don't get their allocations until later in the spring anyway on these, and then most of the big, the ESSER is, Kirk did that in that overview, and we will load it into the budget before July, and you'll get more detail on that as we go. But so most of these is mainly kind of the change between 2 years ago, what we thought we were going to get versus what we got this year, because he doesn't know what he's going to get next year yet. So that's kind of what you see in the changes in these budgets. So not a lot to talk about there. SPED is next. Not quite as big a budget, about $48 million, and you can see the program expenditures there, and we have the same kind of layout for this as well. So I would just say, once again, your two, by far your biggest sources are your local property taxes and state aid. And then federal revenues, fairly big, but it's not nearly as big as it's supposed to be. supposed to be, I think, 40% of the cost. And you can see it's about a little over 10%. It's about 12, something like that. So not quite there to their goal. The special ed detail, starting on page 28. There are a few level ones in there because there isn't any changes you can make. Those are just, you have to do those things. But most of it is at level 4. There's a couple at the back that are not at level 4. So I would take you over to page 29, and we have one there for staff services budgeted as an expansion. That's tab 70 down at the bottom there. And it's a 1.0 FTE board certified behavior analyst for a pilot study implementing special training individual to provide training support and analytical skills for youth with significant cognitive disabilities whose behavior interferes in their learning and jeopardizes their safety and others as well. So that's a pilot project. Maybe it'll be expanded on. If it's highly successful, you'll see a report on that in the future. But that's an expansion there in special ed. And then items, tab 71. That was a mistake we made. It was not supposed to be a level 3. It was supposed to be a level 4. So we will make that adjustment and bring that back to you. You know how we say we want everybody to tell us what their 1% reduction packet is, because we ask everybody to at least do a 1% reduction packet. Well, this one is the 1% reduction packet, but it wasn't recommended, and that didn't get referenced here. So we have the one expansion, and all the others are supposed to be level 4s or current year funding, current year programming. So that's special ed. Questions about that, you can just turn around and ask Deb, because I probably won't be able to ask them or answer. Any? If not, we'll go on to the capital outlay plan, and I'm probably the only person that, or maybe Doug, that likes this next document. But this is our 5-year capital outlay plan, and it drives our capital outlay budget like our general fund plan drives our general fund budget. I'd just point out that we do have COVID revenue up there. You know, there is no state aid with this budget. I know you guys know that, but for those in the audience or at home, there's no state aid in here. It's primarily driven by property taxes. And we do have a covenant or a promise with our opt-out that, or not our opt-out, our bond, that between the capital outlay fund and the bond redemption fund, our levy will be $3. We won't go over that. So that's what's driving the local tax revenue on this item, is just offsetting what we're having to levy to pay off the bond that we passed. So that's, you can see that's $32.6 million this year. Next year it goes down, and it's part because that bond payment is going up. The levy is going up on the bond. Total revenue available, when you throw in the federal dollars to pay some of those items Kirk talked about, is $36.7 million. Then you can see in there, we kind of group our expenditures. Well, total debt service payments are about $12.8 million. And then we have several items, including operational service and maintenance and site improvements. That's the biggest, that's $7.6 million. Jeff Kreider has a 15-year maintenance plan that we kind of go by religiously. We follow that, and we plug in what he projects, and then he goes out and meets with all the building principals, and they give him their issues with their buildings, and then we fit that into that plan of his. So that's highly organized, and it's a big number, but it's quite a process to get to that number. There's other items in there. We have some tax sharing agreements with our neighbors for land that moved into the district. We have vehicles. We have miscellaneous equipment and furniture. Building allocations are $635,000. That's flexible spending that the building principals get with capital outlay dollars. We got the next biggest item there is technology, $5.9 million, and and $600,000 of wireless infrastructure budgeted for next year. That's the APs, which I know the initials, but I can never, access points, I think is what it stands for, is what that is. So the non-debt service capital outlay expenditures are $17 million. So the two together are real close to $30 million. Then there's these other items are just either putting into or taking out of banks of funds, because sometimes you have large amounts you need to spend and you want to build up to that. All other than at the very bottom is the transfer to the general fund. That number there, if it doesn't, it should, matches the number that we showed on the general fund spending, the 5-year spending plan. Just one last thing on this. Below that is all kind of what happens with the banks. The most important is what happens with our CIP cash flow. We're not spending any money out of that right now through the capital outlay fund because of the bond that we did. And that was part of that deal where we lowered the capital outlay levy as part of that. But you can see we are building it up for when it goes away. And that's what's going on with that item there. I won't get into all the other stuff. It's fairly mundane and a lot smaller figures. But you can see how that CIP plan is shaping up for the future when the bond dollars are all spent. Any questions on the 5-year plan? No? Okay, and then here, this is just the detail of the capital outlay fund, and I have to admit, my plan is off by a few $1,000s from this. There was an adjustment made, and I haven't made it to the plan. That'll be made before we bring it back to the board for the tentative approval at the regular board meeting in April. And then here, if you really like to get into it, here's all the detail, starting on page 34 of all the requests that were funded for the capital outlay plan by cost center. You can see most of it is in facilities group, operations, or in IT is where most of that is spent, other than paying off the bonds that's in the finance office. Here's the summary of our tax-supported funds on page, if I can turn the page 39. The funds that are on here are funds for which we charge a property tax. That's our tax-supported funds. You can see our total is 285 or 282 million in actual expenditures that year. And then the rest are enterprise funds, self-supported. We don't usually get into great detail on that. If you have questions about them, we can certainly answer them. I think I promised I'd try to be done in an hour, and it's been about an hour. So I'd stop for questions.
This is kind of random, but I'm looking at page 4 or 37. And I just noticed it has boys high school uniform rotation, girls high school, in addition to middle. How does that work? Like, does every 5 years all of the middle school girls get new uniforms, and then like, I'm just curious. I've never really understood when or how they got those, and so does anybody know that?
I think, like for band uniforms, it isn't every high school at once. But for items like that, it might be. But boy can certainly get that answer to us. Yeah, so
just out of
we'll get that back to you next time. It's interesting, yeah. I know Casey is always buying helmets every year. I know that.
That is not how that's listed. So, he's only buying 15 at a time. That's why right. Every year every high school gets 3 new helmets. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I'm sure you'll think of some. You can email them to me, and I'll get the right person here, because I'm not the right person to answer most of these. We'll either get that from them, or if it's complicated, we'll have them here, and they'll give you the answer themselves next Wednesday. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Todd. Thanks, Todd, everybody. I mean, the Budget Committee, between the Budget Committee and all the different groups that work to complete this and get it to us is very much appreciated.
Yes, last year I asked Dr. Maher to kind of make this change to add the second work session, because it's a lot for us to digest, and even the committee members who've seen it twice, So it gives staff, family members, and so forth more time to kind of get back to questions with administration, to get back to questions with us with changes or cuts or additions to see, and we can get deeper into those questions. We are a public school, but we have to operate as a business and be held accountable to our taxpayers and our community. But we must maintain and excel in our amazing programs and diverse programs and strive for excellence while we're doing that, so that our community continues to choose our school district. And we know that we have to be competitive to do that. So I really appreciate everyone putting in the extra effort to add a second work session to this, because I know it's extra work for all of you as well and for the board, but I think it just gives us a cleaner method of doing this for our public. So thank you for doing this. And this is a fun year. I shouldn't say fun, but it's a good year money-wise to allow us to do some things we really want to do. We're going to hire an EL coordinator, which we really need to do with the amount of students we have in that. We're having more counselors and less students, so that means the numbers of students per counselor are going down. We have more teachers, less students in the building, so that's a better ratio in there. So it's allowing us to do some of those things that we've been wanting to do, and hopefully we'll see some success with our students with this added approach. So. Should I open it up to any other comments from the board?
Just the importance of keeping kids in school, keeping them in their seats with good instruction, good curriculum, improve, it's research is showing that improves test scores and graduation rates. So the budget reflects that.
I'll open it up for public input on the FY22 proposed budget. Seeing none, I'll close it for that. I'll move on to school board committee reports. Mr. Tolke.
I have nothing to report.
Thank you.
I have two quick reports that my two committees meet. The first one is the Education Foundation. This week, we're starting our public school Proud grants. We're looking to have another record year of fundraising. We've awarded 44 grants to 67 educators, totaling $108,000. The largest grant was at about $9,000. The smallest is $174,000. All of the winners will be listed on our Facebook page. We're currently organizing our annual social media fundraiser recognition for May, which is Teacher Appreciation Week. And a thank you to Dr. Boyson and Dr. Zeke for reading 215 pages of public school Proud grant applications. Wow. Year to date, we're looking at about a $328,000 checking and $330,000 in our endowment. Our next meeting is April 6th. Sports Authority also met. I guess some of this is older information on Summit League, just that we had no spectators, but CVP did report that we had fans that stayed in hotels and utilized conference rooms to watch the games. There was much talk surrounding House Bill 1217 with the tension with the NCAA. At Marathon, we have 148 signed up.
Okay. Policy meets next week. And so I don't have anything for that. And then my workforce development meets Friday this week, so I don't have anything for that. And then, did you have anything for insurance? I wasn't able to attend.
Well, just the premium.
Okay.
I attended for us.
I really actually don't have anything. Carly covered policy, and Head Start had to be rescheduled for last Monday when we had a board meeting, so I wasn't able to attend. And I'll let you cover SCLC.
Okay, perfect. Next week, we have our National School Board Association Conference online. So just a reminder, there's supposed to be an email tomorrow, I think, with links to do that. And we'll probably have Bev post, we'll probably get together so we can kind of plan which conferences we would like to attend on that, the breakout sessions and so forth. the Associated School Boards of South Dakota, Mr. Pogany contacted me because our illustrious board member Todd, since he is not running for school board again, cannot be our delegate for the Sioux Falls delegate. So after the election, May 18th, we'll need to choose a new person to serve that position. The chamber, we had an interesting meeting. They are having April 15th diversity and inclusion seminar, and they're asking people to sign up for, and they have had a great sign up with businesses and so forth in doing that. Budget, we've covered. SELC, still working on some new things, but basically they're looking at really trying to get in with the school district as well to look at possibly working with parents and the schools and talking to families to see how they can better communicate with, non-English speaking people or people who are maybe underemployed right now in Sioux Falls, and really work on that demographic as well to make sure that we're developing that workforce and how to do that. And because they know that the schools are trusted by a lot of these families, maybe government isn't. So that's one way that the school being part of that. So I gave Dr. Stavem a heads up that one of the head of that team is going to be meeting with her and asking how the schools, and really it will just be us kind of facilitating. We won't be doing most of the work and so forth on that. And then, let's see, reminder, next Wednesday will be the second work session on budget. And then also our strategic plan update. I don't think we've set a time yet. Usually we do 3, but if we're needing more time, that might get bumped up a little bit to like 2:30ish possibly, but I don't know yet what you're thinking, how long on those 2 things. So, okay. And then 4 o'clock will be our Southeast Tech normal board meeting on Wednesday, and then April 12th, our school board. So anything else? Seeing none, do I have we are actually going to move back into executive session. Do I have a motion to move into executive session for SDCL 125-2, 3?
Second.
Okay. Motion is second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are moving back into executive session. Thank you.